Hello and welcome to the DMPL podcast. I'm Aaron Gurnis, your host, and we are very pleased to have author Andrew Sean Greer with us today on the podcast. Andrew is going to be the special keynote speaker. Oh, there he is. We got video up on Zoom. We were just talking about that. Andrew's going to be the special keynote speaker at the 23rd annual Iowa Author Awards dinner on October 20th here in Des Moines. It's of course the Des Moines Public Library Foundation's great annual event. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Doing great.
Yeah, we were just talking before. People did a little pre-roll here, people don't know, but we're gonna do something different, and then we had to go on Zoom due to some tech difficulties, and then you didn't have a video up for a little bit. We're like, well, we didn't need to plan on that, but now that you're here and we can see you, this is awesome. So we'll probably have this on YouTube too.
Super awkward when your colleagues have like blacked out their screen because they have laundry in the background. So I'm here to show nothing's in the background.
Well, and I had the microphone sitting in front of my face there for a second, so I remove that now so you can see my face as well. So let's talk a little bit about you and your career. And I think you had 6 novels now and 4 before Less in 2017, but obviously I think things kind of, maybe for you, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels probably like a little bit of a before Less and an after Less sort of thing. You even had big books that were today book club books and stuff like that beforehand, but it feels like it's a little bit of a before and after. Is that true? And what do you think, how has your life kind of in your career changed in that time since 2017 when Less came out?
Well, I would say it is before Pulitzer and after Pulitzer.
it is always before Pulitzer and after.
That's true. Out for 9 months before it won a prize, and I was really happy. I mean, people read it and bought it, but it's not like it was a bestseller.
Sure,
it was just a personal triumph. And I think I'd had those before, but I hadn't had anything like what happens when you win a Pulitzer Prize, which is there's like a year where there's a whole route you take. Like you get invited all over the world. Everyone books the next Pulitzer Prize winner, and you have to prepare yourself for when it's over. It's over. Like Pulitzer Prize comes in April, the ride's over, and you have to call that person and wish them the best.
Well, this is interesting because the Pulitzer itself is also a little bit different than a lot of the literary awards in that there's not really like a short list that's released or a long list that's released beforehand. It just kind of is like gets plopped in and they announce the winner and they announce the other books that were considered finalists in that regard. And so I guess what kind of preparation did you have to know this was coming?
None.
Not even that you were being considered?
No, of course you don't know that. And then you don't even, I mean, I guess there are many authors who think every year, I hope I win the Pulitzer, and they win. But I was not among those. It was the last thing on my mind. Yeah.
So when the news comes that Less is the Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction, and what was it, 2018 technically then, since the book was released in
Yep.
Less is announced as the Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction. You got to tell us how are you finding out the news? What are you doing? And you just said you had no idea this was coming. So obviously big shock.
It happened in the most ridiculous way possible. It's announced in New York at like a luncheon. But I was working in Italy in the wilderness outside of Florence for a literary foundation. And my job was I was training my boss's pug to wear diapers that I had purchased online because Margaret Atwood was coming. That's literally what I was doing. I got the pug in the diapers and put it to bed. And then my boyfriend showed me his phone. So I was doing the least literary thing possible when I found out. And so then it took a while to find out whether it was true because it just didn't seem likely. Just to get a picture on his phone didn't mean it was true. So my phone had a lot of calls that I had missed because I just wasn't.
Because you're putting a pug in diapers. Like what?
Answering my phone, the pugs are, as anyone who owns one, are really difficult. Yeah.
Have you talked with other Pulitzer winners about just like how surprising it is and like what happened, like how things just happened so quickly and you had no clue it was coming?
One of the nicest things is that after you win, every Pulitzer Prize winner in literature writes to you or calls you. and suddenly part of this world of people. I don't know Donna Tartt. I think of her as this person on a pet, and but she loves pugs. She sent me pictures of her pug. Suddenly you're in this group and they all give you advice. And two of my good friends, Michael Chabon and Michael Cunningham, they called me and congratulated me, and they were like, okay, here's my advice. And all the advice was enjoy it. There's no downside. No one's mad at you. It's just a wild ride, and have
Yeah.
a good time.
So when you're going on these trips, I guess like give us some examples of where you got to go, who you got to meet, things that you would not have been able to do without that opportunity.
I don't know. I found myself staying at a palace in Jaipur, India.
That's a perfect example.
Not something I would have done.
All these trips that Les thought he was going to take that you ended up
Yeah.
taking.
I mean, he goes to India, but not in a palace.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think where else I went. I went to Australia twice. I got invited to South Africa, but I turned it down because I said, I think I have to work on a book because it's such a long journey. It's like 2 weeks of travel. But and that is the other part of it. The recent winner, Hernan Diaz and Barbara Kingsolver, I wrote Hernan and I was like, here's what you need to know. And one of them was learn how to say no, because you have to be able to get back to writing your books. You don't want to just try to keep clinging to the free ride, because that's not writing, that's not literature, and it leaves you unhappy and
Yeah.
unable to get back in the rhythm of things. So I had written, as you said, enough books to know that you have to keep writing or you get unhappy.
It's got to be exhausting too, I imagine. Just like constant travel. I mean, as fun as it is and all the cool opportunities, there is a part of it like where you're finding yourself in a different bed for the seventh time in 12 days or something like that. I imagine that's got to be a little exhausting too.
I didn't find it exhausting. I had such
That's awesome.
I just enjoy, everyone told me enjoy every minute, and I really
That's
did.
awesome.
Yeah.
I guess when we talk about Less, the book, and how it won this Pulitzer Prize and was, great, really well received in the literary world. I do think sometimes people that maybe don't read literary fiction, that don't read Pulitzer Prize winners or National Book Award winners, they have this preconception of literary being maybe unapproachable or maybe dense or maybe a little the conceptual. You're not talking about the most sometimes the most, it's very, I don't know, like conceptual, I guess is a good word for it, in terms of like authors are trying really cool experimental things, and that's not necessarily for everyone. And I think with Less, you created a book that is both very approachable, very relatable for a lot of people, but also something that obviously found this groove with a lot of people that do enjoy the literary world. So what do you think it was about this creation, this book, this character that kind of brought people from both of those worlds together?
Gosh, I mean, I have no idea why they picked it. I've never spoken to the people.
You've never asked those people in New York with their fancy suits what they did, what they liked.
I have no idea what they were thinking. I do know the other books that were up for competition, and all three books were similarly. Elif Batuman had a novel that was also had lots of wordplay and literary references, but was funny, Hers is not dissimilar from mine. And Hernan Diaz had sort of a highly literary Western, very different, but all of them were real stories, like it was a Western and a college novel and a trip around the world novel. Those are all kind of genres in a way, something readers can grab onto. So I think certainly the committee that year, they kind of wanted what I have to admit I like, which is like a book that's full of beautiful language, interesting ideas, but where like there's a diamond heist. That's the best, right?
Yes, I love that. Yes. Where there's a diamond. I love that. I love that idea. This is kind of a good transition because you actually have served as a judge in the National Book Award, and in Less is Lost, Arthur talks is on a literary prize panel. I'm just curious how much of those experiences could be related with, or like what your experience was like doing that. And 'cause I think it is interesting. There's so many books released every year, and I think even in Less is Lost, you talk a little bit about it. Sometimes seems like it's the prize is as much trying to shine light on authors that aren't necessarily as well known as it is trying to pick out the best books of the year in different prizes and stuff like that. So what's that really like when you're sitting in those panels and discussing some of these among hundreds of books that you are published each year?
I mean, that was hard. It was hard both to read 250 books,
Yeah, I bet.
or to not read them, judge them.
Yeah.
um, and because you miss some, and just because you're in a cranky mood that day. And you're looking for a diamond in the rough. You're looking for not even in the rough, you're looking for something that didn't get picked up, because we're all aware as writers on these committees that media kind of pick up on the 2 or 3 books which have a vibe, and they just pick them. And there's other equally good books that don't get the attention and never make it, and that poor author just sort of sits around. So we were looking to pick one of those books, but and we all went in with fairly honest motivations, but everyone has like a secret motivation. Like they have their friends who have a book up, or they really want only people like only a woman has to win, or there have to be a certain percentage. And so everyone has, and even I have them. So we each had our axe to grind, and like authors we had met and didn't like or gave us a bad review. All started to, it was very honest at the beginning, and then once it got down to the last couple of weeks, it all boiled up, and we would all just argue all the time. And I don't think any of us, certainly the chair, she got what she wanted on the list, but I don't think the books I wanted got on there, because I didn't know how to fight in a committee.
And it's just such a, I mean, I think just the sheer volume of things that are published in a year. Like there are a lot of movies published in a year, but in the end, like there are 30 or 40 that are probably like Oscar bait, Oscar that you can, if you want to, you can sit down and watch those 30 or 40. Where you were talking about 250 books. I mean, like you said, it's almost impossible to like just actually conceptualize all those books as you're reading them.
Yeah, I mean, like I had COVID last week, so I was able to watch all the Marvel movies, so I can judge them. But like I can't read all the Marvel comics, like it's just not, it's harder in that way. It's one of the joys of reading is that it enters you and it takes a while, but that's the hard part. If we're supposed to read, at the end of the year, I'm not going to be able to tell you my favorite 20 books.
Yeah.
I've only read 20 books, it doesn't. And so I don't think, yeah.
I think sometimes so many of my favorite books of the year, I look back and I'm like, well, they didn't actually get published this year. Like I just discovered them for the first time,
And mostly I've given up on that. Like I don't read contemporary fiction. I think it's an old habit from being broke and only buying paperbacks and shopping in the used bookstore section. But I like it because I end up picking up things like, I don't know if this book is any good, but I like the cover and the description. And then that's the best feeling, is to discover it yourself.
Well, what's a couple of books that you've picked up recently that you do like?
Well, I'm reading Nancy Mitford novels, which no one reads anymore. Like very twee, British, early 20th century, and they are so charming. And I read them as a writer. I'm writing a book that's heavy on charm in the literary voice and the telling. And so I came across those, which most people I talk to have never heard of her, but some people are like, oh, you're going to love it. It's a treat. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to see how she does it, something that's a little out of style and old fashioned. I want to pick that up again.
I had to go. I'm not gonna lie. I just quickly typed in her name. I was like, "What? Who is this person?" 1904 to 1973 is the birth to death. So that's what we're talking about here. But they look cool. So that's something for people to jot down. Nancy Mitford. So let's move to your writing a little bit. You talked about. I'm just curious about what is your writing process. You wanted to make sure you stayed in the groove of writing. So you said don't be afraid to say no on this Pulitzer kick that you were on in 2018. But that means you obviously have something that you're trying to accomplish throughout the course of the day, the week, the month. What is your groove? What is your do you sit down every day, every morning, and try to pound out pages, or do you just kind of work as things go?
I no, I do it every day, and almost every writer I know just has a daily habit
Yeah.
of showing up. I I try to make it flexible so that if I'm not in that space, I can still write. Because if it gets too magical, this isn't even my house. This is I rent the guest room of my friend's house up the hill because it gets me out of my house.
Mhm.
And there's nothing for me. I can't do my laundry here, I don't need, luckily I have the internet password, but sometimes I just turn it off. But my new thing I picked up in the pandemic was to wake up at 6:30 in the morning, make a cup of coffee, and spend 2 hours internet off where I can only read or work on my book. And I can't read the news. It was because the news was so devastating every morning that it would be distracting. How can you go back to your stupid book when and I mean, it happens all the time. It's always devastating. Uh, so I always think like, well, I'm not going to change the world in the next 2 hours, and reading the news doesn't change the world. So I'm going to wait. And it works really great. Like I can go straight from just a little coffee and going from my dream state into working on the book. And it feels really easy. It's not that insurmountable blank page that can happen. That happens later in the day when I do end up going to this room where I can find lots of things to distract myself because the internet is here.
When you write a story, when you're coming up with the story, are you an outliner? Are you just kind of like pushing the pen and going and then seeing where it takes you? Or how does that develop? At least that first draft, I guess.
I used to be an outliner, and as I get older, I realize how bad my outlines are. That I always have to abandon them, and so I try to do it like a crossword puzzle. Like I know vaguely what the book is going to be, and I always know how it ends. I think that's helpful,
Interesting.
um, just because I know where we're going and what the tone should be. Like if everyone dies at the end, a comedy has to be a certain kind of comedy.
Yeah.
But then there are certain scenes that I can envision, like I feel like this belongs in the book, and I write those even if it's pretty deep into the book. I'll write whatever scenes I feel are clear to me, and they slowly connect to each other and make other scenes more obvious. And then some scenes, you have to get them from here to there. You have to write that. That's the least interesting thing to write, but you have to. And eventually they all connect up into a first draft, and I at a certain point I do outline it and I pick where it's going to go, and
Sure,
that's what
yeah.
I'm
Well,
doing. And yeah,
you have things out of order a little bit, so it sounds like you do have to almost like storyboard it then afterward as you're
yeah,
coming up with things just to kind of
yeah.
find that
Like,
connective
where does
tissue.
this go? Yeah, or this phrase. I just wake up and I write something and I decide where it goes. But I have faith now in myself that everything belongs in the book. That I have good instinct on that.
When did that faith develop? Was it
That
just
probably
experience?
it's just experience, I guess. It came from writing books that had a lot of research. I had two books, Max Tivoli, three books, Story of a Marriage, Possible Lives of Greta Wells, that were all set long ago, more than 50 years ago. So they did lots of research. And when you do research, you have to think, well, it's all interesting, or none of it's interesting to some people, but like which parts belong in my book? And I just would have to, for Story of a Marriage, like I would read through the microfiche of 1953 San Francisco Chronicle, and I would push print when I felt it belonged. And then I made a bound book of everything I'd printed out. And I was like, all right, let's see what's in here. And a book comes out of it
Hmm.
because it's a certain perspective on that year that narrows it down enough for characters and plot and clothing and situations to come to life.
It kind of sounds like there's a lot of cool things, but you're really seeking to find out what's important then as you're doing this process, whether it be for the researched books or not the not researched books. You start with what's important, and then you find everything else from there.
Yeah. And some things you just are too gorgeous not to put in. You're like, you find out something that's so cool, and maybe you shouldn't put them in because you have to like sort of shoehorn the plot. But readers rarely complain about that.
And that's when you get to win. You get to battle your editor over and just be like, I'm going to win this one.
Or you end up cutting it the way this.
Sometimes you lose.
Yeah.
So when you come to Des Moines on the 20th, what are you going to be discussing with us or talking to us about?
I mean, I'll be talking about how a book is made. I'll talk about Less is Lost because that one I know really well, and also because it's about a trip across America
Yeah.
for sort of a coastal elite to travel to places that he probably judged in the past. And then I could also talk about, like, I lived in Iowa City,
Yeah.
uh, for a while, and my experiences there.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, we're looking forward to having you here in Des Moines. Can you? I know you talked a little bit about your new book that you're writing. Can you let us know a little bit about it, or is that still under hush hush?
Well, usually with every book, I just lie about it. It's set in Italy because that's where I was living for about 5 years, and so it's the most obvious thing. It's a comedy about an American abroad in Italy, but it's not Arthur Less. It's not even present day particularly. I put it in the 90s because I was like, oh, good. Then there won't be cell phones or too much email.
That is
Ruins the
the
plot.
that is the trick that I've read. I think it's more prevalent in movies. I feel like, but like you, so many movies nowadays are just set in the 90s or like early 2000s. It's like, okay, we can use email at work, and that's it.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
well, yeah, we look forward to seeing you here on Friday, October 20th in Des Moines at the 23rd annual Iowa Author Awards dinner. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for having me.